Hey guys, welcome back to Tidal Gardens. You guys probably haven't heard my voice on here for a while. Some of you newbies may not even know who I am. So, hello, my name's Becca. I'm the media executive here at Tidal Gardens. For the past 2 years, I was doing a series on a 120-gallon beginner tank. When I started working here, I knew nothing, absolutely nothing about what it took to take care of a reef aquarium. The only tank I ever really kept was a betta fish tank in college, and even then I wouldn't consider myself experienced in that area either. This tank was actually going really well for a while. Aptasia and algae issues aside, of course. Coral were thriving. No, not those ones. We don't talk about those. There's a reason those of you who have been following along this whole time haven't seen me for a while, and it's the main reason why I wanted to make this video. It's the end of an era. Let's talk about it. So, the original purpose of this tank was supposed to be a learning experience for me. Prior to coming to Tidal Gardens, I had absolutely no involvement in the reefing hobby whatsoever. I honestly didn't know it was a hobby, let alone a rather large one. I was always more into dogs and reptiles and that sort of thing. After getting hired full-time after my internship, it only made sense that I actually get hands-on experience within the industry that I was now directly a part of, and this tank was the solution. It all started from a bare bones tank and led me to figuring out how plumbing works, leaks and all. I learned the ins and outs of aquascaping, and I found out the importance in patience when it came to cycling a tank, and just the overall ups and downs that came with caring for a whole ecosystem of corals, fish, snails, and various other microorganisms. The second goal for this tank was to provide a different perspective on this YouTube channel. This tank served as a really good resource for beginners first coming to our channel. Overall, I would say that the Tidal Gardens channel is really catered towards the more intermediate to experienced end of the reefing spectrum. Van talks a lot about niche topics, and those aren't necessarily what beginners are searching for. So for beginners to learn along with another beginner was a huge deal and a really great asset for the channel. There's something uniquely valuable about embracing the mindset of a beginner. It's easy to get lost in the technicalities and the jargon, but viewing things through the eyes of someone just starting out helps keep things refreshingly simple. It encourages us to break down complex concepts into digestible little tidbits, making the hobby a lot more accessible. Plus, remembering the initial challenges and questions we had as beginners can also provide some insight to experienced reefers as well. I think in total, this series stretched more than 2 years and 13 videos, with this video being number 14. And recently, I kind of didn't know where this tank was going. It's been in cruise control for a while now, and there weren't any big plans for the future. It was just doing fine, and there wasn't really a whole lot to talk about. At this point, we kind of had to take a step back and reevaluate whether to keep going with this series, because one could argue that it accomplished everything we were looking to accomplish with it. I got a ton of hands-on experience with reef keeping, and we got content we were looking to get, bridging the gap between total beginner to an intermediate hobbyist that can now dabble in niche topics of the channel. Another problem with a tank going on cruise control is it invites neglect. This tank, unlike most of the tanks in the hobby, is a 9-to-5 tank. It's here at the office, which I'm only at for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And that would give me plenty of time to give it the attention it deserves if I wasn't also doing a bunch of other tasks on top of that. When I first started here, I was doing some photography and videography, and that was pretty much it. I used to have whole days where I would be free to care for and document a growing reef tank. However, now that my position has grown along with this company, a lot more of my time has been taken up with all the needed photography for the website, a good 85% of the videography, and all of the editing that goes along with those two things, as well as all of the graphic design for the website and a fair share of the social media. The thing that is going to take a backseat to all of those duties is going to be the YouTube series on a tank that is just kind of cruising along. After taking that into consideration, I decided it was finally time for this chapter of this tank to end. It was actually perfect timing though, because a lot of the corals that I had put into this tank had developed into really healthy colonies that the guys at the office have been itching to cut for a while now. The frogs spawn in the tank were already being periodically fragged up because they grew so fast. But corals like the blue raven blastomusa, the neon green candy cane, and the teal duncans were all happily fragged up and probably sent to some of you if you ordered within the last few months. Don't worry though, all the fish in the tank went to other tanks to continue their jobs. Most of them actually went into the various tanks in the greenhouse, which is even better for them because they have even more space to swim around. The only one that didn't end up getting put into the greenhouse was my solo clownfish. He actually ended up being put in our anemone show tank. Normally, a tank like this would seem like a clownfish mecca, but this little guy has been hosting in a frog spawn for so long, I'm not sure he knows he can live in the anemones. So he's just been kind of swimming around, enjoying life, and not really hosting in anything, but he seems fine. So anyway, great. We've decided to rehome all the fish and corals within the tank, but what's next? Well, there was no way we were going to let a perfectly good tank sit empty, and as luck would have it, there was a problem we were having that could easily be solved by freeing up this tank. Meet our old anemone tank. See, it didn't used to be an anemone tank. This is just what happens when you try to quarantine bubble tip anemones and they just start splitting at an exponential rate. Believe it or not, we started with a single Nexus Burst bubble tip anemone, and now it has exploded to what you see here. Not even. We've sold countless numbers already, so the population is actually way more than what you actually see. We tried our hardest to keep them contained in isolated anemone baskets, but at some point they just kept escaping, and I think we just gave up. Since this tank became overrun with anemones, that only left us with one other quarantine tank, as well as a couple Rubbermaid tubs, which really limited how much coral we could bring in at one time, either from wholesalers or just moving corals from the greenhouse to the new building. But now that we have a whole 120 gallons just sitting empty, we figured it would be best to transfer all the Nexus Burst anemones into there and free up the smaller tank again so it could be used as a quarantine tank. We technically could have used my tank as the new quarantine system, but the ergonomics of a deep tank are no good for quarantine, and all those anemones really needed some additional space, so that's why we went with this setup. After adding the anemones to my old tank, we realized it unintentionally became a really cool show tank along with just being an anemone storage tank. I mentioned earlier that we already have an anemone show tank with a few dinner plate-sized Colorado Sunburst bubble tip anemones, so why would we need another show tank? Or why couldn't we just add all of these anemones into that show tank? And the simple answer is chemical warfare. It actually is a little bit more complicated than that. Keeping different types of bubble tip anemones together can be hit or miss. In our experience here, it's been more of a miss than a hit. So we try to keep the different strains of bubble tip anemones separate. For those of you who haven't experienced this, when different types of species of bubble tip anemones are introduced to the same aquarium, they may exhibit aggressive behavior toward each other. This interaction might not truly be a form of chemical warfare, but more of a Wild West, this tank ain't big enough for the two of us situation, where it might be stinging, bacterial, or some other unknown mechanism. In the end, would I consider this experience a failure? Absolutely not. It was a very good learning experience, and I actually did enjoy taking care of the fish and corals in this tank. After a few years, I can definitely tell why there are die-hard fans of this hobby that have been doing this for years or even decades. So, where this is the end of an era of Becca's tank in the literal sense, it continues to live on as something new, and maybe it'll eventually get turned into something different down the road. Something, time is a flat circle. Anyway, life's all about the learning journey, right? I'll still be a fan of this hobby, but instead of being a player on the fields, I'll be a fan with a little foam finger off to the sidelines. Anyway, that's about it for this series. I'm sure I'll see you guys down the road in another video. So, until then, happy reefing. Take care. When I first started here... Okay, I can feel hair in front of my face. To an intermediate hobbit. I'm a hobbit. Hello? The dust floating right in my eye. Felt like I'm gonna sneeze. So where this is an end of an... This is why I don't film at 7:30 in the morning.